Some might say that this is now AI's world and we only live in it. The implications of that development for our lives, our jobs, relationships to each other, and what it means to be human, well, those remain to be revealed. In the meantime, though, this next phase of our technological advancement needs to be fed with electricity, a challenge which our grid is having trouble meeting. On Friday, April 11th, PJM took yet another step to address the challenge of meeting the astonishingly rapid growth of large, principally data-related loads. It'd be easy to call out PJM, as some have, and say they've mismanaged the process of dealing with these new data centers. But a prudent review of the situation on the ground might suggest that they're dealing the best they can with a situation nobody's ever seen before in power markets anywhere. Why do I say that? Well, let's just look at the magnitude of the loads that have mushroomed up. In May of 2024, for example, AEP Ohio served 600 megawatts of data-related load. Today it has 11,000 megawatts either under energy service agreements or committed to pay for the required infrastructure to serve that load. Dominion, the utility at Ground Zero, recently filed for approval of its large load interconnection queue process standards and noted in its filing that about 25,000 megawatts of large load requests have already been assigned projected connection dates between now and December 31st of 2031. Okay, that's pretty big. Oh yeah, the utility also noted that as of December 31st of last year, the company is now looking at an additional approximately 45,000 megawatts of large load interconnection requests under that queue process. So not surprisingly, PJM has a huge and nearly impossible challenge in front of it. That's been demonstrated in its most recent 3 capacity auctions, the last one of which came up short in securing the capacity required to meet its desired reserve margins. You know, the excess supply that needs to be available in case we lose a critical power plant or transmission line. In response to the dilemma, PJM is proposing to hold a one-off procurement process for 14,900 megawatts of new capacity to serve these large loads. With the assistance of consulting firm Charles River Associates, CRA, PJM would facilitate a bilateral contracting process between large loads and supply owners, including demand response providers. The planned process will run from September through next March, and if the 14,900 megawatt goal is not met, PJM would run a second phase after that. The winning suppliers would then be paid through a contract for differences approach, under which they'd get revenue from PJM's normal base auction and then be trued up, either paid more or have to pay back to reach the contracted strike price. Simple, right? Resources that are allowed to play include new projects, capacity uprates on existing power plants, repower generators that have been deactivated, as well as new demand response and distributed energy resources. These assets must demonstrate an ability to operate by June 1st of 2031. Delayed power plant retirements would be unable to participate. PJM and CRA will serve as confidential intermediaries and provide matchmaking services for load and new supplies. The contracting parties would then set terms and conditions and contract out of PJM's purview, and parties could consummate bilateral transactions on their own. Sounds kind of like a Frankenstein approach to me, or at least a new kind of Hail Mary project. The genesis of this parallel auction concept came out of the January White House meeting with the 13 PJM states, a meeting at which PJM and the data center companies were not involved. Here's my concern with this approach. We all know that turbine supplies are limited, as is other energy supply infrastructure such as transformers and switchgear. While the big 3, GE Vernova, Siemens, Mitsubishi, have all announced manufacturing expansion plans, the grid-scale turbines they make are basically sold out through 2029. Global Energy Monitor recently reported in its Global Oil and Gas Plant Tracker that U.S. planned turbine capacity and development, announced in pre-construction or construction phases, jumped from 85 gigawatts to 252 gigawatts from 2024 to 2025. And of these numbers, on-site, co-located generation capacity catapulted from next to nothing in 2024 to just under 100 gigawatts in 2025. And some of that may not even be grid connected. So where will these new turbines come from? They're wanted in Texas, Arizona, Ohio, and all over the world for that matter. So we need to assume some finite amount of equipment supply. Then there's the interconnection queue that has to be completely overhauled for this parallel auction, even as it's cleaned up for the capacity bidding into the BRA. Then there's a cap for the next 2 PJM-based residual auctions. if I'm a developer of a new resource here, and I'm only going to build in PJM, let's say, I have two choices. First, I could bid into the BRA and accept my capped capacity revenue of around $325 per megawatt day for only a single year. Or I could bid that new resource into a bilateral auction and fix my price, uncapped, for a decade or more. Which would I choose? Before we answer that question, let's add one more data point. A recent estimate from the CEO of Kumu Energy suggested that at present, the opportunity cost of energizing 1 gigawatt of data load by a single year is $7.5 billion. So the faster you can get it built, the more value. $19.2 million per day. Now let's go back to that question. I have a market that's capped and another with customers likely willing to pay enormous sums to get into the game. Where am I going to put my capital? It's kind of like the so-called billionaire's tax. If I mess too much with the incentive structure, global capital can and does gravitate quickly and easily towards higher returns somewhere else. The likely outcome, then, is that no new capital gets devoted to serving the existing PJM capacity markets, or very little. And by the way, if I'm an existing resource, I'm not happy about being locked out of this new and lucrative opportunity within the same ISO. I don't follow PJM. It's kind of in an impossible situation. However, I'm not sure this approach is going to be pulled off very easily without collateral impacts to other parties within that ISO. As I said at the outset, though, it might be that it's now AI's world. We only live and consume electricity in it. Well, that's all for this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.